that people aren't buying their first home until 40 years old is mind blowing.
Through the first 9 months of this year, 28 out of every 1,000 homes have changed hands.
If OpenAI overcommits on something, whether it's power, accessibility, GPUs, whatever, there's just a lot of potential landmines along the way.
It went from $1.25 up to about $10.50, with a lot of people saying, man, how does this not get to 100 a share? There's a lot of pain in housing that they are attempting to address. Episode 64 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Two uninteresting guys talking about very interesting times. Jeff, no better way to kick off this show, summarizing this real estate and housing market than the BuzzFeed headline, 19 reasons strippers think we are absolutely, without a doubt, in a recession right now. I don't know. I got a good chuckle out of it, Jeff. It feels like maybe right where we're at, and what a way to start the show.
I'm interested to hear your man on the street reporting of this, Mark. I'm just hoping that your wife isn't listening to this episode. If you have anything firsthand to report on it, kidding, of course. But yeah, that was such a funny headline, and I mean, I guess when the strippers are feeling the economic pain, it doesn't matter that we're in a government shutdown and no government data to go on. We've got the authoritative source there.
Yeah, we've been, other consumer industries that, in Chipotle, like a lot of the food, Chipotle, McDonald's, all that. Chipotle was way down. I saw some 16+% on some bad earnings reports. It's nasty out there. We've been feeling that a lot, and we've been talking about it a lot here. And it's, being in the difficult position of kind of bad news is the sign of maybe good news coming to the real estate world at some point. I think it's things like this where the recessionary feelings, not saying we're in a recession, but the recessionary feelings are spreading to more Main Street America, not just real estate professional America.
Yeah, I think that's right. I saw an article just recently talking about like the McDonald's value meal gaining steam, kind of in contrast with, maybe the pricier options to eat out at the Chipotle and others. As an aside, I don't know where you stand on Chipotle, but my wife was recounting an experience of having gone recently and feeling terrible after, and she's like sworn it off. So I don't know if Chipotle is the barometer of how like the American consumer is doing, or if it's more of it's leaving a bad impression or a bad taste in your mouth, literally.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm a fan. Certainly a fan. I find a lot of the young kids live on this stuff. I've got like nieces and nephews that are in their 20s, and they are going there all the time. And it's kind of a generally healthy meal. Maybe this is turning into an ad for Chipotle, Jeff, or depending on where you want to be. But yeah, I'm seeing advertisements in my region now of Kubota. I don't know if I'm saying that right, or Doba. I see it in airports, and not a fan of that. It's another burrito company.
Yeah, well, not a shortage of those I found. There's one that started here years ago that I've been a fan of, called Cafe Rio, but I don't know how much national like coverage it has. But interesting to see like how they're faring relative to cheaper options out there, though.
Well, friend of the pod, not so much a fan of the pod as a fan of Chili's. Friend of the pod, Tony Reese, his favorite place is Chili's, and they've been doing quite well. And there's this 3 and pick me of some $10, $11 meal that's 3 course and sit down and all that. And that seems to be what's winning here is trying to find a unique experience for not a lot of dollars. And I think all of that is recessionary stuff. And I think DoorDash was way down just within a few hours of recording this. I've never ordered DoorDash, Jeff, at least to my knowledge. I don't think I ever have. And I saw someone saying, no bigger IQ test than someone ordering DoorDash and paying $27 for a $6 burger instead of going to pick it up. I feel that way, but maybe I'm just cheap.
It may be a combination. I mean, two things can be true at the same time. I suspect, Mark. You may be cheap, and they may still be a good option. I don't know. Rarely, but on occasion, have I done that, or Uber Eats, or something. Yeah, depending on circumstances and whatever. But it's interesting, interesting to like see the financing options to be able to finance your mill. As an example with with some of those services as well. But I haven't seen recently if that's been gaining additional steam or not.
I do, man. We see this all over, and I think this is just general economic observation more than anything. But like the DoorDash thing has always felt to the nerdy, intuitive side of me that if someone is willing to pay $27 for a $7 burger or whatever it's probably exaggerated, but something like that. Doesn't it tell the maker of the hamburger that there is room to charge more? And I feel like we've seen this in so many things. I'm trying to buy tickets to a football game. I ended up buying tickets to a concert that I ended up selling because it was like people were willing to pay 4 times more for this obscure artist. The ski slopes, it's so expensive now, and there's like a monopoly on this stuff, but people are willing to pay more for these entertainment things. And when you see that people are willing to use their disposable income for 4x what a normal burger costs, like why would you not improve it or increase the prices there? And I think we've had a lot of that. That to me is kind of inflation at its core.
Yeah, it really is. And I think you're hitting on something too that's just naturally occurring out there is this premium value placed on experiences, whether it's the concert, the ski, the travel, the whatever. I saw another article where they were interviewing some of the CEOs of airlines who were not seeing as much of a drop in like projected air travel through the next coming year or something. An interesting interview I listened to with it was short, but with a travel agent, and they're just talking about like how robust the priority that people are still putting on travel. And when they surveyed them, it's like have your travel plans over the next 12 months, increased or stayed about the same or decreased, based on economic conditions. And they were not decreasing, at all. Some of it is probably a spillover effect from COVID and being, locked down, in a relative way, but just interesting to observe, where people are willing to spend the dollars and maybe where they're not.
You bet. Well, I think on this track, Jeff, is the first topic on the docket, which is the I guess twofold related to housing. We had a couple of reports that were highlighted this week. One of them is that the median age of first-time home buyers in the U.S. has soared to 40 years old. That is beyond imagining or beyond my imagination. Up from 33 in 2021 and up from 29 in 1981. Boy, what interesting trending. And, it was a year ago that I think some report had come out that Canada, who we kind of work in and around that real estate market, is seeing the same sort of trend. I'm not sure that it got to 40, but it's way up. And I think that's disturbing. I think that's a disturbing trend. I think we want home ownership accessible to a lot of folks. Or is it, Jeff, that the Gen Z types are writing off home ownership? What do you think?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic. I mean, bear in mind, this is first time home buyers. This isn't like the average age of the typical home buyer, whether first time or move up. And so, that people aren't buying their first home until, 40 years old is mind blowing. And my read is that it's a combination of at least two things. I think one, and the obvious one, is affordability. I think there are more people that would like to be buying their first home earlier in life than they just feel like financially they can or should. I do wonder if there's a secondary trend of not wanting to be locked into a home or like the responsibilities of home ownership. I mean, is there a trend or a preference, maybe away from that, maybe not across the board, but with a larger, swath of Americans? I have less data around that. I don't know if that's a driving factor or not. I do know that the affordability, certainly is. You and I don't have kids that are old enough to be thinking about buying a house yet, but that will be, increasingly on the horizon. And I do know a lot of people that would like to be pulling that trigger and just can't, like don't qualify, like literally is not an option, even though they would like for it to be. home ownership remains, one of the staples of developing and building long-term wealth over time. And so I think financially it has been and remains a good economic decision. But I think the affordability is the main driver there, Mark.
On social media, in hard to really take a good read from a general market trend or demographic trend, but you do see people questioning, is it right, or is it a net benefit to me to own versus rent? And you've got all these build to rent subdivisions, giving you an option to have the yard and the newer home and all these things without having to worry about replacing the air conditioner and whatever else can pop up that can be really expensive. I think, not to mention, there is a general feeling is in the US, as we've seen home prices rise so dramatically during COVID, there's a wonder that, am I going to get underwater when I buy something like this? And I think it's a reasonable thing to wonder whether it comes true or not. I don't know. So, there are a lot of information out there, much more than 60s, 70s, 80s, where even 90s, where people are like, oh, well, yeah, you get old enough, as soon as you're able to, you go buy a house because that's just what you need to do.
Yeah, well, and I think these things do have an ebb and a flow, or a pendulum that swings, back and forth a little bit. In the lead up to the great financial crisis, it was buy as many as you can possibly buy, like homes that were, sitting vacant and stuff. And so there was that extreme that has then, kind of swung the other way. But it's fascinating to observe these trends, and the preferences, do shift somewhat over time. But my sense is there are still a lot of people that would like to be buying and just aren't able to.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do think it's right. And I mean, I've said it 100 times during us recording this, but we also do have this sort of cruel psychological experiment to would-be market participants as it relates to housing, with all of this monetary policy, Fed printing, interest rates shooting up, shooting down. We spent a long time last week talking about this credit creation theory and sort of the feeding into this Ponzi scheme of home price increases, and that the bottom could fall out at some point. And Jeff, we're seeing pockets right now, like little mini pockets, boomlets in troughs of mortgage activity based on these strange things that are going on right now. And I think, what a weird 6 weeks we've been through here, where we had, leading up to Jerome Powell's 98% expectation of lowering rates lowered, no mortgage activity, or kind of a trough of mortgage activity. Powell speaks, lowers the rate as expected. The rates rise, the mortgage rates rise as a result. And then we see more mortgage activity over the last 2 weeks. What in the hell? It's just a cruel set of psychological currents, I guess, that are being put together. And here we find ourselves.
Yeah, that analogy of many currents running together just continues to pop up in my mind, Mark, because that's exactly right. I mean, at this point, I'm wondering, should we just be hoping for them to raise their target rate, because maybe that will have the effect of actually lowering the mortgage rate? And I mean, we know what happens. The market adjusts based on the expectation. The mortgage rate doesn't wait until Powell waves his magical wand, saying, okay, it's now okay to cut rates on all mortgage, or on all debt instruments across the board. It adjusts, and it almost feels like it kind of overcorrects leading up to them making the decision that they signaled they were going to make, they actually make, and then the mortgage market, kind of swings back, or, fixes the overcorrection. And so it's fascinating to observe the dynamics, the relationships, the way that these things work. But with both of the Fed fund rate cuts that we've observed, it's been that exact scenario play out. And mortgage rates get better before the meeting happens, they do what they said they were going to do, and then the mortgage rates bounce back up again. And this time, like you say, the volume was kind of inverse. The rates were at their lowest point, and we didn't see as many transactions. And then as the rates go back up, we've seen a little boomlet again. I don't have any confidence it's going to hold as a long-term trend, but hopefully you can make sense of this crazy market for me at some point, Mark.
Let's find a way to quit printing money and quit drastic changes in interest rate, and let's slowly get there and deal with the consequences. But let's effort to get to that. My gosh, it's very cruel. And I think on this subject, we have a graphic to show here. Through the first 9 months of this year, 28 out of every 1,000 homes have changed hands. This is the lowest rate in more than 30 years. And in an example at the height was 2021 during COVID, where we had the rates at 0%, causing everybody to move. We had near 45%, 45 homes out of every 1,000 changed hands. So, we're 40% lighter in terms of activity. The fence sitters are indeed sitting on the fence, Jeff. And if we look at pre-COVID, just before 2019, we were at 40 every 1,000 homes, or out of every 1,000 homes, 40 would change hands in the first 9 months of the year. So, that is a really, really big dip from 40 to 28 for every 1,000 homes out there. And I think this is a graphic that hits right on what you and I have been feeling and talking about living and working in the mortgage space. I think it matches every anecdote of folks that would like to buy but can't now for a whole variety of reasons. And why are we seeing I wouldn't call it a mini boom, it's just not a dearth of activity, is because I think there is an expectation that rates may not move for 45 days plus. I think all we need is the Fed to just get to a rate where it's going to stay for 12 plus months, communicate that, and then we start moving. I'm not even really sure, Jeff, that it matters much what the damn rate is.
I think I think you're exactly right. The stability is more important at some level than the rate itself. My only concern is I don't think the rate, or that the Fed is going to make that decision and then signal it. I mean, everything you've heard Jerome Powell say is, we're going to be data dependent. We're going to make moves based on the economic data that we get. Now, we've talked on this. His term is going to expire next year. We have a projection through the end of the year as to whether he'll even be in that position through the end of the year or not, which I'm trending pretty well so far. So I'm hoping for his his employment status to remain unchanged for at least the next 6 weeks or something. But my only point is, with new leadership, might that change? Might there be a more of a willingness to signal a longer term strategy in play as opposed to this much shorter term reaction and adjustment? I don't know, but I think we would all be better served if that were the case, because the certainty more than the rate really does seem to drive the activity.
Yeah, it's just clear as day to me and to you, I think. And yeah. I would imagine that it is this clear to the Fed. And why are they not doing it? And I think the answer is that they're concerned about inflation and what it would send off. So they're trying to do this, but it's just, I think it was Scott Bessent he did a lot of interviews this week, I think, but one of them, observing that the housing market is in a recession. I mean, I'd hard to argue with for 3 freaking years, right? I think it's been there for quite some time. And that is why it is that I don't know if now is the time to do something, because I'm pretty sure things are changing in short order to the positive for me. They can't get worse than they are now.
I've had that exact conversation with other participants as well. And it's like, this chart is really interesting because in 2012, we were coming out of and kind of starting to recover from the financial crisis and the massive swing there. But even at that point, we had 34 of every 1,000 homes were turning over, and it worked up until pre-pandemic. But we're way below the historical trend, and so by every data or every metric of volume, if we just revert back to a historical mean, a normal level of transaction volume, it's a meaningful improvement in the number of mortgages done, sales done, appraisals ordered, all of those sorts of things. And, it's tough to be bouncing along the bottom of this, historically slow, it feels like, locked up, housing market in terms of volume and transactions. I've been a little surprised to observe that as slow as the volume is, that home prices haven't adjusted significantly. I mean, we've seen little pockets where there's, single digit, drops in prices, a little bit here and there. I don't know if that will change dramatically or not. We haven't seen, home prices falling off a cliff, but the result has been, the transaction numbers have just been way, way down. It sure feels like, that we'll be looking at tailwinds as opposed to headwinds in the future, but I don't know if that future is next month or next year or way beyond.
I think there's little argument, Jeff, that Fed monetary policy has created all of this. I would say unnecessarily, and over decades, right? We've been talking about that, and I'm up for some market move merch that T-shirts saying "in the Fed," right? On some level, I'm sure that can't be done overnight, and I don't fully understand the ramifications of that, but a lot of trouble has been caused by all of this, and free market feels like a good thing.
Yes, yes, it does. Interesting to observe how it goes. I know that they feel like they got burnt, with this transitory inflation argument for not adjusting when they did earlier. It feels like some of their, kind of hypersensitivity to data now is trying to not relive some of the mistakes that they made previously. And it's easy for any of us to look back after the fact and say, well, yeah, you should have done this differently. We all can do that. But I think your point is well taken, that a lot of what we're observing today is a direct result of the decisions they've made.
You bet. Well, Jeff, to our one of our favorite topics here, which is artificial news surrounding it. The Big Short, the great financial crisis, Nostradamus, Michael Burry has come out with some, I don't know, I'm not even sure what to call it, but he usually can catch headlines because he famously made so much money running against stream and declaring a bubble when no one else saw it.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, if you got something right, are you destined to get the next thing right when you're kind of counterculture, on what you're betting against? So the headline that we saw and have kind of discussed a little bit offline was, he's got a $1.1 billion short position on NVIDIA and Palantir stocks, which he disclosed through his his investment company. I think one of the articles I was reading is the CEO of Palantir was, very upset and obviously arguing against, the rationale for that. I think what's interesting here, not just that it's a bet, against the stock price going up of those two companies, but the size of the bet, that he's making. This is not a hedge, of a small percentage, I don't think, of the investment fund. And so really, really interesting, that he called the housing crash correctly and benefited wildly from it, in terms of economically. I really wonder if this plays out the way that it does. I did see, not related to this specific story, but some analysis, that price earning ratios on publicly traded companies, and I think the Mag 7 in general, were higher than historic averages, but not so high as to be like obvious bubble territory. I think what Michael Burry is betting is that it is a bubble and it's going to pop, and then the pricing is going to come down significantly. If that's going to happen, I'm not seeing any signs of it happening yet, but it's really interesting to see him come out and make this bet.
Yeah, I think I kind of get the feeling that people put too much weight on these. It's so easy to listen to all this when someone's done it correctly once for enormous financial gain, and very difficult to decision. I picture the guy holding the American flag in the middle of the hurricane blowing hard. Like, it's hard to stand there with that perspective at the time that he did. So kudos. But you then assign, people love a good sky is falling bet. And so when he comes out being quiet for a long time to do that, 2023, he was also warning of a major crash due to inflation concerns. Boy, that was the wrong play all the way through. The stock market has soared. So, a prediction there that aged like milk. Yeah. I don't know. I think this plays into people's thoughts. Jeff, we were just on a company meeting. I was bringing up my favorite slope or cycle, which is, new technology. You get this enchantment or euphoria at the idea of it. But then shortly after that, you start getting through this trough of disillusionment where everybody is just sort of, well, okay, this was great. Now all the work is here. Can we actually connect the A to B dots that have been identified? And then you slowly start to get back on a natural trajectory of things. And so if you are in the middle of or beginning of this trough of disillusionment, is all of this too many GPUs? Are we going to not need these anymore? Are we really getting the effects out of these things? I think it's a good time to hit with this headline. He's got money behind it, so he's making a bet there. I was reading a post from our AI czar, David Sachs, which I thought was interesting, that there are two narratives regarding AI right now. A, it's a massive bubble. B, it's about to give rise to super intelligence, right? These are the two big concerns that are out there. And one or the other could be true, but both definitely can't be true. If it is super intelligence, I don't think we got a bubble problem, for sure. So I don't know. A lot to say on this topic. I just recently watched the Brad Gerstner BG2 interview with Sam Altman and Satya from Microsoft. Sam came across like intentionally arrogant, I think, and as he often can, but almost defiantly arrogant, even to the interviewer, who is one of his shareholders, saying, "Look, you don't think we can do this? Sell your shares. I'll immediately find someone else to get there." It's pretty bold. But what I think you got from his portion of the interview is a strong internal confidence that, I like, there was one point in the interview where I think they're doing publicly known 13 billion a year in revenue right now. The thought was that they maybe could do, the interviewer suggested 100 billion in revenue in 2028 and 2029, something like that. And he's like, no, 100 billion in 2027, and so he's like moving up the timelines. There's just a lot of confidence in whatever they're seeing, right or wrong. We don't see the same data. So a lot going on, Jeff. I've got a mouthful clearly. What do you think?
Well, it's just such interesting times to be living in. That interview is next up on my docket of things to listen to, Mark. So I haven't seen that specific interview, although what you're describing of Sam Altman seems to be on brand and on character from what I've seen in the past. And they are really moving the needle on artificial intelligence, right? So it's fascinating to see. NVIDIA is one of the primary drivers of the hardware needed to be able to fuel this boom. So it's just so interesting. I don't think that you're going to look back and see that people overestimated the impact that artificial intelligence is going to have. But just like this discussion with Michael Berry, even in 2023, getting that part of it wrong, you can have the right read and just get the timing wrong, as far as when to place the bet and when the bubble happens or bursts or whatever. So there's just so much to it. It's fascinating to see those companies that are the leaders in the clubhouse in the artificial intelligence race right now. I do kind of expect that, like what we saw in the internet boom, that not all of the companies that were the leaders in the clubhouse ultimately prevailed and were successful in the long term. My guess is that the landscape will look pretty different in 5 years than it does today as far as who those leaders in the clubhouse are. I'm not smart enough to know whether OpenAI is going to be one of the casualties of just competition or not. They're swinging big, and there's I think Sam seems to be playing kind of an all or nothing or go for gold kind of a game, which is high risk, high reward. I wouldn't be surprised to see them be successful, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he overcommits and ends up with some sort of an issue where they aren't ultimately the ones that prevail.
This is like largely where the conversation was centered around, and it's interesting to see both Brad, the interviewer, and Satya, who are they know the reputation that Sam Altman has, this kind of overconfident, cocky, and all that. But Satya was like, look, he's execute every single thing that he's told us he'll do. He exceeds what he said he would do. Like, the team is executing flawlessly. And they're at the forefront of all of this, developing product and all of these things. So, but they talked a lot about like trying to time all this from like a resource perspective, Jeff. It's like, like have the GPUs right now. Microsoft has a bunch of these things they bought, which are kind of hard to get, but they have more than they can plug in. And then he's got the risk of having those in storage when a new version comes out and makes those not usable anymore, and so they're all playing this game. And like energy contracts, there's just a lot of reason that maybe the energy needs that are enormous right now are way less. And if you commit to 10, 15, 20-year energy deals, because you got to right now, that you're left holding the bag, because energy, they're making a lot of inroads in processing all this stuff much more efficiently. So, like Google, you had Ask Jeeves and Bing and all these other things that you knew the market you were chasing was enormous. Not everybody was going to be a winner here. It was all trying to fight for who was going to be the winner. And so there were a lot of people left in the wake of the biggest success in history from a business perspective. So I think that's what everybody sees this as. And we'll see. It's a game of kings, and there will be losers in the game.
Yeah, there really will. And I think you make a really good point, Mark, that there are these, kind of currents of processing power, getting the right, the timing right on the processing, the power needed. If you're projecting, the same power consumption per GPU or whatever today as projecting that into the future. Elon was recently on the All In podcast, and I think it was there where, talking about power consumption per token output. And as he's so good at doing, he says, well, you look at the human brain and it's running on, like 10, I think 20 watts, 20 or 40. I'm not as smart as Elon yet. Don't know that I ever will be. But he's saying, man, we're throwing tons and tons of electricity to power these things, which we need to in the moment. But one of the things that I think will get better over time is the processing, or like the energy efficiency of these AI models. And that's going to come through a number of different ways. I think efficiency of the GPUs. I think, as I'm hearing interviews with people, I think one of the evolutions will be, you don't need the biggest, most power, like utilizing models to answer and do a lot of the stuff that you do. You get a small model that's focused on what you're doing specifically, especially in business applications, right? You just need less processing power thrown at something. And so I think we're going to find a lot of ways where, that changes. But the point is, if OpenAI overcommits on something, whether it's, power, accessibility, GPUs, whatever, there's just a lot of potential, landmines along the way. I'm not predicting their fall. It's been crazy to see how, successfully they are executing along the way. But that's just to say it's a road fraught with a lot of, potential risks, and you have to continue to get things right over the long run to not be one of the casualties, that falls by the wayside.
You bet. Yeah, tough decisions that all business people have to make. There are a lot bigger stakes, it seems like, in what these artificial intelligence chasers, the hyperscalers, are having to make. I don't know. And it's interesting because you can have a zero revenue company spring up to a 60 million revenue in a matter of a few months because of these sorts of things, all to find the next release of ChatGPT to just do what your company was doing as an overlay on top of it. And now it's gone, so it's just a lot of stuff going on there. Not exactly a world we're living in. I have, Jeff, I will report. We've talked a little bit about trying to use voice interaction with these language models to kind of immerse them in your life sort of intentionally, to start thinking about it. Just this week, I started doing that on the school ride to school with my 6 and 9-year-old. And they're having a blast. They were excited this morning to get in the car and do it again and have some conversations. So we've talked about dinosaurs and birds and space and all sorts of things so far. So it's been good. And it even leads me into some questions about, our podcast direction and things we might be able to do on the drive home after I drop them off.
You mean they weren't interested in the how to build a podcast conversation with Grok?
No, certainly not my podcast.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I shared like what our Facebook, or our YouTube image looks like with one of my kids, and it was kind of met with the same thing of, I didn't even know you did that, and that's of zero interest to me, which I get. I didn't expect that it wouldn't be. But one of the things that was interesting that you shared, a link to the conversation around like the podcast that you were talking with Grok about, and not only did it show me the conversation, but it allowed me to pick up in the conversation where you had left off. And so I had asked it, it turns out to be a very similar question that you continued, to go on and ask it after you'd sent me the link. But it was just cool functionality that like I could jump in and join the conversation, that you were having with this AI model, for example. And it had really impressive output that it gave. It's easy to take for granted, but it's worth observing, I think, from time to time, how good these models are getting, and at what a pace, they're improving as well. It's just really fun to see.
That it is. What a world we're living in. What a world. Last few things I was wanting to talk about on the podcast. One is just an ongoing update of Open Door, kind of specifically around the stock. It was left sort of to die for a year plus in the dollar a share. Keith Raboy ended up hiring this Kaz character as CEO from Shopify. Boy, a lot of excitement and almost GameStop level enthusiasm that I've seen around the stock. It went from $1.25 up to about $10.50, with a lot of people saying, man, how does this not get to 100 a share, in relative short order? There's excitement, right? And I think we've talked about on this podcast, knowing the business model, there is a lot of room for disruption in this space. There's a lot of pain in housing that they are attempting to address. iBuying, there's real estate technology generally, there's all sorts of room there. I'm not sure that anybody has found the business model that works in all cycles and solves these problems to the way they need to. And so I think some excitement and renewed perspective that Open Doors brought in may be able to get them there. And I'm excited to really watch. But I thought the sort of the hysteria around the stock was not matching the current business model or the near-term business model. A lot of concepts to be built out, improve. We're down to $6.82 now. So, I still think that's probably a little aggressive on a number of fronts, even just judging vibes and momentum, frankly. I think there's probably some reality to set in after the excitement of the executives sleeping on the floor on an air mattress. That only can go so far. I appreciate the enthusiasm, but just watching it closely because I do think that these folks that they brought in can reinvigorate the business plan and reattack or attack more vigorously some of the pain points in the industry. And I think they could be a leader in the clubhouse to make real headway.
Yeah, I think that there's a little bit of this coming back to earth in terms of the stock price. And at the end of the day, the business model does have to prove itself out, to be profitable and actually return something to the shareholders in order for it to, support a significant increase in the overall stock, valuation from a longer term perspective. It's interesting to observe. And again, it's kind of like, conversation we were just having. I do think there is a lot of room for disruption in this, space of how do we add a lot of liquidity and just make it much easier to sell and transact residential real estate than it is. Is Open Door the one that's going to crack that code, in a scalable way? I don't know yet. They're certainly, going after it aggressively. There are a lot of pain points. We've touched on those in the past that could really be scaled back with the right solution, but it has to not only be the right solution. It's got to be a business model that works. It's been a few years now, but you see companies, Zillow, for example, like making purchases based on, their estimate or their internal valuation. And that works until it doesn't. And, I think Open Door maybe experienced a little of that, prior to the recent enthusiasm. And so does the recent enthusiasm translate into long-term, viability and success? Really interesting to see. I'm not hoping against it necessarily, but it's, as you observe it, they've got to get a number of things right as well in order to be successful long-term, I think.
Very good, Jeff. Well, the last topic I've got is the Supreme Court of the United States versus tariffs. We've got, I think yesterday, the Supreme Court heard arguments at lower courts. Trump's kind of sweeping global tariff policy has been struck down as overreaching. From my understanding, presidents for decades have been implementing tariff changes, but doing sweeping changes in the way he has, declaring an emergency with fentanyl and other problems that are there, or what is in question. I get a little concerned about it. Just more uncertainty. I know if the greater concern here is the deficit, the federal deficit, and we've brought in $600 billion and gone through all this freaking pain with implementing these tariffs and arriving at new plans. What happens if they're struck down? I think that's a rhetorical question. I don't exactly know. I'm not sure everybody does, but I'm just looking at ChatGPT or Grok here, that thinking about a 40% chance that the tariffs are upheld and a 50% chance that they're struck down. if they're struck down, it would be kind of like short-term relief for importers, and then all sorts of like kind of volatility and relief in auto sectors, tech, that sort of thing. So I don't know. I'm not really sure what to think of it, but I think it is something we need to watch closely, because this should have an effect on the housing market with whatever comes down with this. And I personally am hoping that at this point, the tariffs are upheld so that because I think we're in the home stretch of fixing and stabilizing wherever we're going to be.
Yeah, they've been used to try to negotiate these longer term trade arrangements with different countries around the world. I think if the purpose was just to have the tariffs in place, using this emergency declaration is problematic, because it's not by its definition a long-term, situation or arrangement. So what the administration's tried to do is leverage the short-term pain of the tariffs that are invoked based on this emergency declaration, by the administration to help negotiate longer-term trade deals and agreements with countries. Now, the problem is that not all of those trade deals are finalized, and so that's calling into question and making it harder to negotiate those. Now that people are looking at it saying, well, wait a minute, you might not actually even be able to continue to impose these. And so it's causing some uncertainty there. And I think one of the things I saw is that if they get struck down, is there then a backlog of tariff revenue that's then due, back, that's already been collected. It gets real messy if the strike down is upheld, overall. So, but I do think you're right. I mean, it will definitely impact the economy, and I think, housing generally, inputs for housing, that are being tariffed, as far as hard lumber and other, imports that have to go into the housing market. Worth watching for sure. And with this latest wrinkle, it introduces another level of uncertainty, like you say.
You bet. Well, we'll watch closely. I've seen a number of quotes from some of the Supreme Court justices that don't seem to be too keen on the tariffs, and so we'll see where it goes. Well, episode 64, Jeff, in the books. Enjoyed it once again. Look forward to seeing you next week.
As always, look forward to it, Mark. Thank you.
Take care.